epiphysis. So this topic is a little dear to me because this is a topic which I worked on when I did my fellowship in the US, and probably this was the first one which actually where I actually published in one of a big journal about all the risk factors of avascular necrosis. But it's a controversial topic of late in the last decade, more because of the unstable SCFE and the complications that the unstable SCFE entails. So so SCFE, as you all know, this thing is not moving. 1 minute. Slides are not moving. 1 minute. How do I? Should I exit out of the screen?
Sir, just try once escape and again go in the full screen mode.
Escape. Stop sharing, no?
Yeah.
I just go to...
Yeah. It sometimes happen.
Stop. No, okay. Okay, fine. It's moving, yeah.
Okay, sir.
So it's as you all know, it's a disorder of the immature hip. Usually it happens in the peripubertal age, where the proximal femoral physis, the head slips from the neck in the posterior and medial direction, usually. And there is a translation of the physis through the hypertrophic zone of the physis. So this is a misnomer actually, because the head actually stays in the acetabulum, and actually it's the neck or the femoral metaphysis which actually moves out and moves anterolaterally. That is why people say it's a misnomer. So some examiners or some people can ask you, why is slip capital femoral epiphysis termed a misnomer? So that is why, because actually it's not the head which slips, but it's the anterolateral, it's the metaphysis of the neck which actually moves out of the acetabulum anterolaterally. And SCFE has a spectrum of various things, meaning this is what, in my experience, that these are the four things which vary in each SCFE. One is the temporal profile of the acuity, where each slip is different, and the spectrum of the disorder is different in each case. And also the physical stability of the physis when the epiphysis is on the metaphysis, it varies. And based on that, people call it differently. And it's very different from the clinical as well as in the operating room when you're actually operating. I'll come to that with my slides. And the degree of displacement. So based on the degree of displacement, also there is a wide variation and in SCFE, and also based on the amount of displacement, the amount of anterior metaphysis which moves out of the acetabulum and then impinges on the anterior acetabular rim. So over the last decade, a lot of work, a lot of interest has gone on to this aspect, which I'll cover in my future slides. Okay, this is an example of an 11-year-old girl where you can see what I was saying. Actually the physis stays in the acetabulum, and it's the anterolateral part of the metaphysis which actually moves out, and you will see a very foreshortened epiphysis compared to the opposite normal side, which is well seen front on. Whereas in the AP here, because it has moved posteriorly and medially, you will see it foreshortened. And there are other signs on the radiograph which I'll come to. But this is a typical presentation of a 11-year-old girl with hip pain who came, and you can sometimes make it out on the AP X-ray that there's a problem with the left hip. So as you know, the incidence is very variable. It varies from country to country. they even say the latitude matters. 40 degrees north latitude in the northern hemisphere, there's more SCFE. Races also, it varies, racial variation. So it is more prevalent among the African Americans, Hispanics, more in the blacks than in the whites. And so far the etiology is very unclear. There are many mechanisms that have been put forward. One is with the, of it always usually happens to obese individuals, obese adolescents or children who are usually 50% of the children with SCFE are above the 90th percentile for weight. And also endocrine, those with endocrine disorders, usually the thyroid hormone and the growth hormone. If you have hypothyroidism or hypopituitarism or panhypopituitarism, you are at risk. And then the 3 R's, which I said, the race, and if you have a renal disorder, like if you have chronic renal failure, which predisposes to hyperparathyroidism, and if you've received total body radiation, those are the 3 R's. For students, it's easy to remember the 3 R's: race, renal disorders, and radiation. Sometimes trauma also has been noted to cause SCFE, but it's extremely rare. And of course, in all SCFE, there are anatomical abnormalities which has been elucidated with imaging. That is, most X-rays or most CTs have shown that the children have reduced femoral anteversion and or increased acetabular retroversion, or the decreased femoral anteversion per se leads to relative acetabular retroversion. So there is an anatomical abnormality in the proximal femur morphology also. So you have to keep all this in your mind when you see a patient with or child with SCFE, and rule out all these factors: mechanical, your BMI, your endocrine disorders. So you have to do an endocrine workup. Also ask in history whether the child underwent some radiation for lymphoma, leukemia, or some trauma. So the pathology, as I said, most slips occur through the hypertrophic zone of the physis, and it's usually a Salter-Harris type 1 injury. Very rarely it happens in chronic renal failure to the zone of provisional calcification, but that's a different slip. For most MCQs or exam purposes, you say the physeal disruption occurs at the hypertrophic zone, it's fine. And when they've done a histopath section, they have found out that there are decreased number of chondrocytes. There is a collagen disturbance occurring at that zone, and the weakness of the perichondral ring and the fibrous network, leading to the lack of stability at the physis, causing the epiphysis to slip off. So when I teach the MBBS students, actually I say you should picture it like an ice cream, a cone on top of an ice cream, and when the cone falls off is what actually they can picture the physis slipping off. And in epidemiological terms, before it used to be 4:1, now they say males to females is 3:2. And for some reason, the left side is affected more than the right. So again, classification of SCFE is something they can ask as a short note, and you expected to write this in the essay. If they ask you, there are different classifications. One is based on the duration of symptoms, that is the temporal profile. So this is the old traditional classification, where if you have symptoms of less than 3 weeks, but no radiological signs, you call that an acute SCFE. If symptoms are more than 3 weeks or chronic in duration for more than weeks to months, but there may be some radiological features of blunting of the rounded part of the metaphysis or ossification of the fibrocartilaginous ligament, they say, but that's very very fine calcification you may come across. That is a chronic slip. And if you have been having symptoms of more than 3 weeks, but a sudden exacerbation of symptoms at one particular point, they call it acute and chronic. So based on the temporal profile, the classification of the duration of symptoms, the time tested or the older traditional classification was this: acute, chronic, and acute on chronic. The other classification was done by Loader in 1993. Randall Loader is an American who's done a lot of work on SCFE, and he actually shot to prominence by working extensively on slip capital femoral epiphysis. He's also one of the authors in the 4-author book, which Dr. Benjamin Joseph. It's one of the books we advocate for our pediatric orth residents and fellows. It's because it's written by Dr. Benjamin Joseph, and one of the authors is Randall Loader from US. The same Loader who classified SCFE into based on the severity of symptoms. So if a child comes in with severe pain, unable to stand upright or even able to walk with or without crutches, it means severe pain, he can usually is carried in. So those slips are called unstable. And in the unstable variety, they say 50 to 60% of all of the previous classification of the acute SCFE actually fit into the unstable variety. Or if you take all the SCFEs into account, it comprises only 5 to 10% of the SCFEs. And the stable SCFEs are the one where the child doesn't have that much pain, and the child actually presents to you walking into your clinic onto the OPD with or without crutches. So that is a classification based on the clinical classification based on the severity and not on the duration. But recently, of late, when you operate these patients, you find that actually the physis is unstable. Just like when you try pinning, and when you change it into the lateral position, you find the physis actually slipping off and not being stable radiologically when you're actually trying to operate. And that was brought into attention by this group from Bern in Switzerland, where they said, even though clinically or temporal profile, they can be acute or unstable, but radiologically, instability when the physis is very unstable intra-op is a different category altogether. So what they were saying is there are some chronic SCFE which is supposed to have good prognosis, but when you take them to operate and you put them on the table, you find that the physis is very unstable and radiologically slipping. Whereas there were cases of unstable SCFE, which is thought to be having worse prognosis, but you take them into theater and you try pinning and you find the physis stable. So they actually tried comparing, because of their work on surgical dislocation and actually opening the hip, they found out that this clinical classification or the temporal classification has very low sensitivity and specificity. This is not for your, this is just for you to, for your interest sake. You don't need to know this for your MS or diploma level. This is just out of interest that even though clinically and by the temporal profile, it may not correlate when you operate. The sensitivity and specificity is put up by that group. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Here is an 11-year-old boy who came with pain for long duration, 2 months, and he walked into my clinic, and you can see on the left side that the physis has slipped. And when you do a frog leg lateral, because it's chronic, you can see the amount of instability where it totally almost 50 or more than 50% slips off the metaphysis. So this is what the Bern group or the Switzerland group was talking about, that chronic slips also can have disruption of the physis, which is actually a bad prognostic sign. So actually that when we went on to pin that in situ like that. Okay. So the other classification is based on your slip angle, which Southwick classified based on the degree of displacement of the epiphysis on the metaphysis. And he classified them into 3 groups based on the head shaft angle. So you measure the head shaft angle of the normal side and the abnormal side, both on the AP and the frog leg lateral, and subtract it. then if you get 30 degrees and below, it's a mild slip. If you get between 30 and 50 degrees, it's called a moderate slip. And any slip which is over 50 degrees is termed a severe slip. How you draw the head shaft angle is you draw the epiphysis ends of the epiphysis on the spherical, draw perpendicular to that, and draw a line along the shaft and the head axis. The angle that it makes is the head shaft angle. Suppose it's a bilateral case, you take the normal side as 10 and you subtract. Suppose you get a slip angle of 50 on the abnormal side, and it's a bilateral case, you subtract 10 degrees from that and call it 40 degrees and put it in the moderate category. But if you have a normal side on the other side, you straight away subtract the difference and call it, and then classify it as mild, moderate, and severe. So these three classifications are important. One on the duration of symptoms or the temporal profile, one on the clinical stability, which correlates to your severity of symptoms, whether it's painful or into stable and unstable, which is more the recent classification, which Loder's classification is more accepted nowadays, and one which is radiological based on your slip angle of Southwick. Okay, so the clinical features are most children come with pain, limp, or a decreased range of stiffness or decreased range of movement. These are three most common modes of presentation. And the pain, they almost always say it's restricted to the groin or to the thigh or knee. Actually, in children, if most of them, some of them, at least 50% of them come with only knee or distal thigh pain. And it's localized to the, in almost 46 to 50% of the patients come with that sort of complaint. And the common tendency is to overlook the hip and examine only the knee. So there's one thing that you young people learn from my lecture, you forget everything else, is one, when you get on to practice, always examine the hip of all children whenever they come with complaints of knee pain. This is very, very critical. And I can't tell you how important it is, because even I've got patients who've undergone arthroscopy at a very big center in other places, and they come here, they totally ignored the hip, examining the hip. And when I find the problem to the hip, they've actually undergone an unnecessary operation in the knee. So it's so vital that you don't miss out examining the hip in a child who comes with knee or distal thigh pain. That's very, very important. And as I said in my introduction, that most of these are obese or their BMI is high, and most of them are in the peripubertal age group, 10 to 16 years of age group. Most fall into that. Very few, if they have endocrinopathy or they've had some irradiation, are atypical, and they can present on either sides of the spectrum, less than 10 or above 16. But more than 90% come into that age group of 10 to 16. And also because up to 1 in 5, up to 20%, 15 to 20% of bilateral, don't forget to examine the contralateral or the opposite hip, because you can have a concurrent slip the other side. Okay, so when you examine these patients, Dr. Dhiren is very familiar with this term, observational gait analysis, which you do in cerebral palsy patients. So I put that in just to give a cerebral palsy angle. So it's very important to, if they can walk, to see their pattern of gait. And most of them will have a Trendelenburg gait because they have a problem with the lever arm. So Trendelenburg is because if they have a problem with the fulcrum, the lever of the abductor arm. And this is a problem with the lever. Like if you have a fracture, non-union neck of femur, you'll have a Trendelenburg sign, positive. So that's exactly what you'll get in a chronic SCFE, where the lever arm is affected. And also because they have pain, it's a painful condition, they'll have antalgia. And so it's an antalgic gait as well, because they have decreased transface on the affected limb. And as I said, the metaphysis actually slips out externally. And therefore, when they walk, they'll have an external foot progression angle. And even when you examine, their internal rotation is restricted. So On examination of the hip, their rotations are markedly reduced. And sagittal arc, that means a flexion extension, because the physis is slipped back, they can have a flexion deformity, and they can have only a flexion from maybe 20 to 90 degrees, and the extension is limited. Similarly, the rotations also are limited because of the abnormal anatomy and because of synovitis, they say. There is loss of internal rotation, but preservation or an increase in external rotation. So documenting the rotation movement of the hips is critical in a patient with slip capital femoral epiphysis. And there is a sign called obligate external. When you flex the hip, they automatically, or the hip tends to fall into external rotation as the hip is flexed, and it doesn't go to the shoulder, opposite shoulder as normally it goes, falls off the body into the other side, which is abnormal. So that's a sectoral sign of the obligate external rotation. Some examiners are fond of asking. Okay, so once you have a presumptive diagnosis, you have to confirm it with your investigations, and probably the only investigation you actually need is a radiograph. And what you do is a pelvis with both hips AP, and you can do a lateral usually in chronic or stable schiefis, where they allow you to move the hip. But in unstable schiefis, a frog lateral is not actually a good idea, or it's actually a contraindication. You should only keep the hip in the same position, but do a cross-table lateral, because any manipulation can actually injure the already tenuous blood supply in an unstable schiefy. So if the examiner asks you what X-ray can you do in an unstable schiefy, you should say you can do a pelvis with both hips AP, and you can do a cross-table lateral or a Lowenstein lateral on the affected side without moving the hip. And there is a sign called as metaphyseal blanch, or the steel sign, because the slipping happens posteriorly and inferiorly. That will, on an AP, come across as an increased radiodensity in the proximal metaphyseal. I'll come to that in my next slide. I'll show you that picture. And there are also in the pre-slip or before the actual slip, there is a radiological stage called pre-slip, where there is actually widening and irregularity of the physis. And in a confirmed slip, there will be, like I showed in the first X-ray, there can be a decreased epiphyseal height. And there is this line called the Klein's line, which you draw parallel along the femoral neck, which is supposed to intersect the femoral epiphysis, almost the latter third almost, or less than that. But that is markedly reduced, or sometimes the epiphysis may not actually, the line may not intersect that line in certain, if the slip is more. So that is an example. See, all those signs, widening of the epiphysis, the metaphyseal blanch that you see, and the Klein's line on the affected side actually going through only little part of the epiphysis, whereas on this side you see it intersects a bigger part of the epiphysis. So if you at one glance, if you see, sometimes many may say this is a normal hip. So you actually, in your beginning of your career, when you're looking at X-rays, you should learn to draw the Klein's line, and you can make out when you draw it on both sides that on the affected side is actually, there is a suspicion of a slip. And then when you do a frog lateral or a cross-table lateral, it's confirmed. But these are the signs, very, very subtle signs that you have to pick up in a child with schiefy. Okay, other imaging, as I said, in pre-slip, sometimes on the X-ray you cannot make out. So sometimes an MR can actually detect a pre-slip much better. And also in the recent times, because of advances in MRI, there are perfusion MRI studies, and if you have a suspicion that the vascularity has already been jeopardized, in some centers, they do an MRI and MRI or a SPECT scan to show that the vascularity has already been compromised. So for early detection of osteonecrosis, there is a role for MRI and SPECT scan. Bone scan has been reported in some studies. For completion's sake, in your exam you can write that there is a limited role for bone scan, although because of the hyperemia and inflammation, many false positives and false negatives have also been reported. So it's not a very accurate modality to use. And because there's effusion, ultrasound, and if the slip is quite significant, an experienced ultrasonologist can actually pick up the dissociation between the metaphysis and the physis, and they can pick up effusion in cases of acute slip. But none of this is actually needed. If the X-ray is confirmatory, you don't need to actually, management mostly doesn't affect your management. So most centers don't do all these advanced imaging studies, but just for completion's sake, there is a limited role for MRI, bone scan, and ultrasound. Okay, coming on to treatment. Historically, SCFE was treated with spica casts. So that, as you know, involves putting a plaster hip spica from the nipple to your ankle or foot, and a half spica on the other side. And it leads to a lot of complications, pressure sores. Spica treatment also caused chondrolysis, and in some cases they have actually found that the slip progressed in the spica when it became loose. Bone graft epiphysiodesis was another historical treatment, which these two are not done anymore. But for completion's sake, in your answers, you can also write this is a historical way of treating slip capital femoral epiphysis. So in bone graft epiphysiodesis, they actually take a peg of bone graft and slot it into the interval between the physis and the metaphysis. So they actually drill across the physis, create a slot, peg these bone grafts into that slot to fix the physis and to prevent it from slipping. And actually, when you slot any bone graft, the complications of resorption, dislodgement, fracture are all there. Those are the complications of that. So those are just historical modes of treatment. So I just mentioned that these are not done anymore in the present day management of SCFE. Currently, the methods which I'm describing below, one is the in situ fixation, where you actually pin the slip in whatever position the patient comes. And that is still the preferred initial treatment in SCFE for both stable and unstable slips. So that is still the standard of treatment in most centers. And of late, in the last decade and a half, there's been a lot of interest in Dunn's osteotomy. So proximal femoral osteotomies have been described for SCFE, but in the last decade and a half, a lot of interest has come in reducing the unstable SCFE anatomically and stabilizing it. So if you do the correction at the subcapital level, two people have described it, Dunn and Fish, you get better correction, but you also run the risk of jeopardizing the blood supply. So there is a higher risk of avascular necrosis. As you come towards the trochanter, the risk decreases to almost 0 to 5% at the intertrochanteric level. So all along the neck to physis, the femoral neck, up to the intertrochanter and the trochanteric level, osteotomies have been described, and they go by various terms. The subcapital one is called the Dunn and Fish, which runs a higher risk of avascular necrosis, and it needs a lot of technical know-how, and people who are used to high volumes of doing this only should try doing this. This is a very little complicated, technically demanding procedure. And there have been osteotomies described by Kramer and Bermuda, which is intracapsular along the femoral neck, further away from the area of pathology. And that, although the correction is not so great, but it carries a lesser risk, maybe half the risk that the Dunn and Fish have. But the least risky is the intertrochanteric osteotomies, which goes by the name of Southwick and Imhauser. Actually, Imhauser is from Europe. So the Europeans, a lot of them do the Imhauser technique. And it's a biplane, because the deformity is in 3 planes. You can do it as a single plane flexion osteotomy. You can do a flexion valgus because the head has gone into varus, or biplane. Or you can do like what the Southwick says, in 3 planes. both the flexion correction, valgus correction, and the internal rotation correction. So that's the intertrochanteric osteotomy. There is also the Abraham's osteotomy, which I sometimes do. I was taught in my fellowship. That is also extracapsular, just beyond the intertrochanteric line, where you take a big wedge and flex and rotate the hip into position and fix it with a proximal locking hip plate. So this is an example of an in situ fixation. So despite the physis slipping, and it's a moderate to severe slip, you actually have to put the patient, you can do it either on a fracture table or on a radiolucent table. I do it on a radiolucent table, and you first introduce a guide pin so that it reaches center on the physis. So regardless of where it is in the neck, you should aim for the center of the physis. And then on the lateral, you pass that, you make sure it's within bone, and you fix it with a threaded screw, usually a totally threaded with a washer screw is used because for ease of removal. So this is another thing the examiners will ask you, what type of screws can you use for in situ fixation? So you should say annulated large fragment screw, 6.5 or 7 mm, preferably fully threaded. And with a washer for ease of removal. And you should use stainless steel as opposed to titanium, because titanium, again, it's very difficult to remove. So preferably a fully threaded screw. And why you want threads to go across the physis is you want a bar to be formed so that the physis doesn't slip. So that's the very indication to do in situ fixation, that you don't want the slip to progress, and you want bone to form at the area where the wire or the threads cross the physis, so that it stabilizes the physis and prevents it from slipping further. And now that bump that forms, that is what can go hit against the anterior acetabular rim and cause labral damage if you leave this bump. And that has evoked a lot of debate into a thing called femoroacetabular impingement, which I'll talk about later. So that is one method of fixation, which is the standard method of fixation for SCFE. They ask you in the exam at the resident level. Now there are newer techniques which actually some textbooks have not actually, that does not come into the textbooks, some textbooks, but it's some of the newer techniques where you can actually do a trochanteric flip and reduce the physis onto the metaphysis by doing this modified Dunn's procedure, and then stabilizing it with screws and pins. And also, as I said, the femoroacetabular impingement, if you have significant impingement, that is the other indication to do a surgical hip dislocation. You dislocate and take off the bump, shave off the bump by doing an osteochondroplasty. So in SCFE, there are two indications to do a surgical hip dislocation. One is for unstable SCFEs. You're correcting it at the slip. And this also requires, it's got a big learning curve, and it requires some technical expertise. Not everyone can do a modified Dunn's without causing harm and endangering the blood supply, already tenuous blood supply. So it has to be done with caution. And now the other controversial thing is prophylactic pinning. So there are advocates for prophylactic pinning, there are advocates against prophylactic pinning, but it's important to know the principle behind prophylactic pinning. So as I said, if you have a slip, there's a 30 to 60% chance that in the next 6 to 8 months, the other side will also have some form of slippage. So in India, I feel, and in a place where healthcare is borne by out-of-pocket expenditure and borne by the patient, if you can tackle the other side at the same sitting under the same anesthesia, and if you have problems of follow-up, sometimes the discussion with the patient and with the family, I think it is wise sometimes to offer prophylactic pinning, especially when and there have been studies which have validated that if the child is less than 11 years, or if the bone age, when you do with a modified Oxford scoring, that means it's a score which takes into account the femoral epiphysis, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter, the triradiate cartilage, and the iliac apophysis. Those 5 places, there are grades or marks given out of, and then if it comes to less than 20, studies have shown that there is a high chance of slippage occurring, and so they advocate the other side to be prophylactically pinned. And also, as I said, if they have endocrinopathy or there is previous pelvic irradiation, that is also a likely patient to undergo prophylactic pinning. But always you have to discuss with the patient and the family, weigh the pros and cons, because there are proponents who say, I will pin only the affected hip, keep a close follow-up on the other hip, and then if at the first sign of trouble, I will pin the other hip. So it's again controversial, but in our situation where healthcare is not borne by the state, like in the West, maybe to reduce expenditure and to do it in one anesthesia, it is a proposition which you should think about, or which I always tell people that it's a worthwhile proposition in India. The salvage procedures are for if they've come chronic with a lot of deformity, pain, and depending on what, again, you have to discuss with the patient whether mobility versus stability, just like in the adult situation. These are salvage procedures. You can do a hip arthrodesis, or generally in women who for future childbearing or for their preferences prefer a mobility rather than arthrodesis, total hip. There are situations where these 2 salvage procedures have been advocated. But in the pediatric age group, we've hardly had to do this, but this comes in an adult skiffy situation with secondary OA, with severe pain and disability, where in the exam you may be asked to say what is the management, and you may have to, like in the adult situation, weigh your pros and cons. And if it's a young male, manual laborer, opposite hip okay, ipsilateral knee and spine is all right, you may advocate a hip arthrodesis. But if a patient can afford, wants mobility, if it's a female, arthroplasty may be the way to go. Okay, so I'll show you one about a modified Dunn's. This is a newer procedure in an unstable skiffy. It's a girl who had an unstable skiffy on the left side. So again, all the signs of the blanch, the widening of the teardrop to the metaphysis. See on this side, the teardrop to the medial neck distance is very little, whereas here it's wide. That's also a sign. The blanching, the widening of the physeal plate, and you can see how it was unstable. This girl came in carried, couldn't stand upright, so it was an unstable skiffy. So we did the Dunn's osteotomy, where we actually do a trochanteric flip and fix. This is an intraop image where we shorten the neck. You actually have to take off the retinacular flap, take off a wedge of shorten the neck, reposition the epiphysis onto the physis, fix it initially with that wire, and then take off the wires and put screws, and then put back the trochanter with these 2 screws. And that's how it looks at 6 months follow-up. And because there's a high chance of avian, this one at 6 months recently came, it looks all right. And because she was 11 and just about 11, and she had some risk factors, we prophylactically pin the opposite side as well. So that is an example of a newer technique with prophylactic pinning of the opposite hip. So what are the complications? The complications are 3. The main 3 complications are osteonecrosis or avascular necrosis, chondrolysis, and osteoarthritis. So avascular necrosis, this is the last 2 decades, even though it's a rarer disorder than let's say clubfoot or DDH, which is 1 in 1,000, or even cerebral palsy, which is 2 to 2.5 per 1,000. This is fairly uncommon, but because of these the debate on unstable SCFE and the controversies, this actually has come into the fore. And the unstable SCFE is dangerous because of the blood supply situation. And in unstable SCFE, the rates of AVN are anywhere from 6 to or 10 to 50%, but in most series, it's between 4 and 25%. So 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 can actually end up having avascular necrosis if you have an unstable SCFE. And the disruption of the blood supply, nobody knows when exactly the blood supply is disrupted. Most think that at the time of the slip it happens. There is a minority or a few number of people who think that it's the movement post-injury while coming to the hospital, or whether when you transfer the child onto the fracture table, or when you actually operate, that you cause harm and damage the already tenuous stretched blood supply. So that is why when you do an unstable SCFE, they say they are very careful. They shift the child very carefully onto the table. They avoid movements, keep the hip in that same position, and try pinning it emergently. So there's one condition, non-traumatic, which you have to do emergently, apart from maybe septic arthritis of the hip. It is acute or unstable SCFE. Okay, so that is about avascular necrosis. Whereas in chronic SCFE, there is not much of AVN risk. It's about 0 to 5% maybe, more by the procedure than by the pathology per se. Chondrolysis is the other dreaded complication. And they said there have been occurrence rate of 0 to 28% with slip capital. Usually it's due to the iatrogenic, when the pins traverse the physis, go onto the joint. But per se itself, there have been incidences of the slip itself causing chondrolysis, which the mechanism or the etiology is unclear. And chondrolysis per se is more in the females than in the males. And also you have to suspect it after operation. If the hip range of movement doesn't improve and there is stiffness in the first 2 to 3 weeks, there's a high likelihood of chondrolysis. So you should suspect that and investigate and treat accordingly. There's not very much you can do. It's one of the conditions where it's quite not. Both these conditions are devastating, avascular necrosis and chondrolysis, because there are very few answers for both these conditions in the child. And as I said, when the metaphysis moves out anterolaterally, and it's bare and causes a metaphyseal hump, inflection can go and impinge on the labrum, and the cartilage can cause cartilage damage. It can lead on to secondary osteoarthritis due to impingement and labral and cartilage wear. So those are the 3 complications that are common in SCFE. So that is all. This is our chapel. So also that SCFE is one of the conditions. Other thing that examiners can ask you, apart from each of those, from classification, can be a short note. All the 3 classifications: the temporal, the clinical classification, and the radiological classification, or it can come as an essay in your written, and the complications of each of those complications: chondrolysis, avascular necrosis, then management, questions on X-rays, or even movement, what is obligate external rotation, sectoral sign, Kleins line. All these are quite favorite questions of the examiners in your Viva or in your in the afternoon session after your practicals, or you can even sometimes get avascular necrosis or secondary OA in your long case as a hip case in a child. Very rarely do they keep an acute SCFE because it's painful, but the avascular necrosis following SCFE or a secondary OA following SCFE has been kept as a long case. So if there are questions, I can take them.
Yes, thank you, sir. And if any resident want to ask question, they can unmute themselves and please proceed. Anybody wants to ask question?
Hello, sir, I have a question. Can I?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
proceed.
Yeah. Sir, regarding the complications, sir, how to differentiate between chondrolysis and vascular necrosis, sir?
Yeah, so chondrolysis is more a diagnosis of exclusion. So on the X-ray, you'll have joint space diminution. On
Okay.
examination, there will be stiffness. And if there are no other causes like a rheumatoid arthritis, you have to do you have to rule out infection, rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, all other causes. Then you come to the diagnosis of idiopathic chondrolysis. And that is actually, in terms of radiology, a diminution of the joint space to less than 3 millimeters. Whereas avian is avascular necrosis, where on the X-ray you'll see sclerosis or cyst formation, all those Fichet-Arlet signs of avascular necrosis.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, any other question?
Thomas,
Sure.
yeah, thank you for this one. Can I add a couple of things?
Sure.
Because of our whatever we have a little experience.
Sure.
One thing I just wanted to tell you, George Anderson was my classmate.
Oh, okay, sir.
George, I think he's in Bangalore now.
No, sir, he's actually now admitted. He was,
Oh my dear.
yeah, he was actually diagnosed with a cancer, and he's undergoing chemotherapy actually.
That I know. Yeah,
So-
I'm in touch with him.
Yeah. He was one of my teachers, my hand teachers. Yeah.
Yes. I just had a couple of things. In acute, only AP X-ray may not be adequate. So they have modified lateral X-ray without turning much patient. So you should have the boys should write modified lateral X-ray instead of frog lateral, which you cannot do it. So certain amount of certain thing, because you need two views at any cost.
Correct.
That is one thing which is, and this clear line also describe, they get a short note on Trethavan sign. That is actually Trethavan sign.
Line, yeah. Clear line or Trethavan sign.
Short note is Trethavan, they are getting on the DNB exam.
Oh.
That is a Trethavan sign which has been. Other important thing is I just saw one or two X-rays. You have been putting just one screw is enough because our teaching was minimum 2 because rotation cannot be avoided at cost.
So that is again a controversy, sir. So they say the more the metal, more the chances of avian. So proponents of both are there. But if it's a wide neck and diameter and very unstable with one screw, dynamically when you check and you feel it's unstable and rotating, like you said, you may have to add the second screw. But when you in Indian necks, I've in my experience so far, I've had to only put a large fragment cannulated 6.5 or 7 mm screw, single screw.
Okay. Another very important that the entry point of these patients are very, very difficult because you have to go straight anterior because if your incision is behind, then you will be struggling. And another important thing for the postgraduate, that surgeon should put the patient on position and not anybody else.
Correct.
Because this is very important for them. Otherwise, some people try to reduce these hips. Only gentle internal rotation is the only recommendation which we have to insist these boys. So there is no forceful manipulation like any fracture neck femur which we do like 90-90 and all that, which has to be avoided at any cost.
All movements forceful. Even the gentle reduction, some proponents
are advocating. Yes.
Don't advocate. So, but for the ease of pinning, actually, when you lay the patient on the table, sometimes accidental some reduction happens, and
it happens. And just gentle internal rotation gives you enough reduction. Even a 5, 10%, 20% reduction that will ease your entry point. Another important thing which has been described well, only AP and lateral image is not enough during the surgery. So it is called real-time view.
Yeah, the in-out view after you pin it to make sure it has not gone out of the correct.
Whatever, you just go on rotating 360 degrees around, so that I have about maybe 25 years back, I had one screw longer, and next day morning I had to tell patient relation that I'm extremely sorry, this is my mistake, and I had to take it back. The patient and took it out and add a couple of extra washers because there are 5mm only screws available distance. So I just added a couple of 2 washer extra and got the back. So, yeah, that is a real time. Yeah. And for chondrolysis, a lot of people are now talking about you can diagnose on MR. That is more easy to. One of the question was asked is the MR can give the chondrolysis diagnosis very quickly. Absolutely. And lastly, there is a treatment called distraction technique for chondrolysis. That's the only treatment available. We don't have anything in our hands. That was described by, I think, Dor Paley or somebody, I don't remember. But that's a technique which has been described for some time, 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And there is a articulation available. So you can have a flexion extension in that range. So the mobility is maintained of this. I think
What chondrolysis?
Yeah. And this work, a lot of work was done by Chris Colton.
Okay.
On this UK, and we had his lectures during 88, 89 during our MCH. So Chris Colton came, he had a lot of work on the capital abscesses.
Even now in Sheffield, I think when we have our POSI meetings, they have a distractor in Sheffield. They've actually described this technique, and they do a lot of arthrodiastasis for chondrolysis.
That was Mike Saleh. That is Mike Saleh. I worked with him actually. I worked with him for some time. Orthofix. Yeah. Thank you for a nice lecture and a lot of work. Sorry that I had to put a couple of.
No, I'm very pertinent points.
Yeah.
Also, I forgot to tell you, I thought this was very technical for the MS residents. Like Sir was saying, it's not as simple like you're doing a DHS that.
Oh, yes.
Like you do a skiff, it can be very tricky and very difficult. Like Sir was saying, the entry point is critical, and the way you actually take the guide pin requires some experience and some doing, because there's only one narrow tract and one zone which can catch the physis through the neck.
Yes.
So I was saying you have to do an in-out technique to make sure the screw has not gone out out of the neck and come back into the physis, or has gone past the physis into the joint. Apart from that, you can even inject some dye through the screw, and if it actually falls into the joint, some people say that you actually traverse the joint space. So those are very pertinent points which are pointed out.
Yeah. Sir, one question, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. Sir, one of your slides says that the screw should aim the center of the physis in AP. AP view should aim the fire. Then, sir, what about the lateral view? What are the direction? As the sir said, Pachore sir said, should aim anteriorly. And sir, what precautions should we take to not to prevent in-out in the placement of growth of in-out in the way just one you said.
What sir was saying is, when the slip more severe the slip and it goes more posterior, your entry point has to correspondingly come more anterior from your trochanter. So normally, if it's in the normal position, like in your DHS, you start on the trochanter, right? Your entry point is in the trochanter. But because the slip in the sagittal plane has gone posterior, you have to start anterior, almost near your femoral triangle. So I always teach my residents to actually mark out the femoral artery. You mark the femoral artery and stay away from the femoral artery and start your pin almost in the groin area, anterior to your trochanter. That is what I was trying to tell you. That you have to go from anterior to catch the slip which is posterior.
Posterior.
Okay.
Because the ball has gone posterior.
And
also only 2 to 3 threads. Yeah. Again, in the lateral, in this is like the center is what we aim for. And center, the guide wire has gone to the center of the physis, and even on the lateral, it's almost in the center. That's what you should ideally aim for. But you should make sure these threads remain in the neck and not out of the neck. When the slip is severe, it can go in, out, and again in.
In severe cases, it is acceptable, sir. In, out, in.
No, it's not. It should not go out of the.
Okay, should be throughout the in.
Yeah, it should always be in. That is why that 360 degrees of what sir was saying. No, after you pin, you have to do a dynamic ranging under image intensify it and make sure that it is not traversed. Yeah, they're not gone in out.
Okay. And sir, about cannulated and non-cannulated, any good with the cannulated screw?
Yeah, once you pass the guide wire, it's easier to not take up, because that I told you there's only one passage to go, and if you've been struggling to get that passage, doesn't make sense to take that pin out and try putting a non-cannulated screw.
Okay.
Once you've with difficulty traverse that guide pin, it's always better to use a cannulated system.
And so one more you have told in your lecture, sir, regarding the disadvantage of this screw. The battery you said the stainless screw are better than the titanium, sir. What?
Because titanium there is difficulty in removing titanium. It gets incorporated into the bone, and they say always titanium implants, there's difficulty in implant removal. So for the sake of implant removal, stainless steel is always better than titanium screws.
Okay. And sir, when should we go for implant removal? Like after how many?
The recommendation is that you don't have to remove it, but for some reason, like sir was saying, if you think it's very close, it's actually progressed, it is in danger of penetrating the joint, or outside on the trochanteric side, it's causing bursitis or some symptoms, you can go in and remove it after 9 months to 1 year. Or once you fix the physis, they say within 6 months, there is in most cases premature physeal fusion, and it's stable. So once that has happened and the physis is obliterated on your X-rays, and then you can remove it after. Usually by 9 months or 1 year, you can remove it if symptomatic. But nowadays we don't advocate routine removal of screws. Yeah.
And so one more thing, you said in your slides, sir, that whether it would be an displaced, like unstable or stable, you have to go for in situ fixation. So sir, in unstable, don't we have to do slight manipulation, or whatever happens by shifting the patient, that is acceptable? Like don't we have
so that is what in an unstable slip, the danger is avascular necrosis. Like I told you, no, already when the physis slips, your retinacular vessels are already stretched. So in that same position, you should not manipulate the leg in the same position. Like in this X-ray, this is also a severe slip. You try in that same position, getting up, pin across, and stabilizing it with a screw.
Okay. So we do not have to reduce, sir. Like
you should not, because that
attempt to reduce.
Your already tenuous blood supply.
Okay.
And, examiners actually can catch you on that if you say you do the Leadbetter maneuver, this maneuver, which is actually contraindicated in this situation.
So we just have to answer in situ fixation for any.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the current accepted standard, because once you are more experienced, once you do a lot, and once you've done a hip training under somebody who knows how to do a Dunn's procedure or a surgical hip dislocation, not everybody can do these procedures without causing harm to the patient. Always I teach my residents that if you cannot do it, never do harm. First, do no harm is your oath. So you should never undertake something which will cause more harm to the patient. So the safe option is to do in situ pinning, which is the current accepted standard of treatment for both stable and unstable slips.
Okay.
And these newer techniques have not actually come into the textbook. So if you read Apley or if you read Lovell and Minter, they say it's newer technique, which is the veracity of which has not been established, which not everybody can do.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
And just Thomas, one point, like you said about the cannulated and non-cannulated. He also mentioned about one tip, like after you put a screw, inject a dye.
Yes.
So if it's a cannulated screw, you can inject the die, and
Correct.
then you can make
That's the
sure
advantage.
that it's
That's the
not, the tip is not beyond the articular cartilage. So that's only possible with the cannulated screw. That advantage is not there with the non-cannulated screw.
Yes.
So one is ease of insertion, and the second is you can verify that the tip is not, has not penetrated the articular cartilage.
Correct. And also once there is different types of pins. So in Scandinavia, there's something called the Hansen's pin, where they actually have a threaded part here or a hook or a pin in the physis, and here it's smooth, and here it's again threaded. So it holds the physis, but doesn't cause fusion or a bar, and the neck will continue to grow. And they remove off the pin. So in the Scandinavian countries, in Norway, Sweden, and all, they use this pin called the Hansen's pin, which doesn't have threads like this across the, we put threads across the physis to cause a bony bar so that there's premature physeal fusion. What happens then is your neck doesn't grow, but they want to keep the neck growing, and suppose it's a 10-year-old boy, he still has 6 years of growth remaining. So they don't want the neck to be short so that later there can be Trendelenburg or abductor lurch. So the Scandinavians have actually come out with a pin which is smooth and got a hook in the physis and has a threaded portion here called the Hansen's pin. So there are various types of pins to actually fix the slip.
Yes. Anybody wants to ask another question? Please proceed.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you very much, Thomas, for joining and giving your expert opinion on this. Thank you once again.
Yes, Thomas sir, thank you very much for your time and efforts for orthopedic PG residents. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Pachore sir and Dhiren sir also.